Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, my name is Alex Reyes, and I have the distinct honor of serving as Chief of Staff and Senior Counsel for the Civil Rights Division, and it is my honor and pleasure to serve as your MC this afternoon for our commemorative program honoring the civil rights legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Thank you for joining us. Before we begin, I want to welcome and thank Department of Justice leadership for joining us today. Thank you for our federal agency partners who are in attendance, and thank you to the civil rights leaders and community who join us today and who over the years have been steadfast partners and stakeholders. Also, thank you to members of Congress who are in attendance as well. In addition to honoring the legacy of Dr. King, we also gather to bid farewell to someone who's been a model of steadfastness and dedication to civil rights, a leader, a mentor, and a beacon of hope for many, Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clarke. With that said, I'm excited to kick off our program of speakers and discussion, as well as a surprise. Our program will begin with welcome remarks from Principal Deputy Associate Attorney General Ben Miser. But first, I invite you to stand if you're able to join in the singing of the national anthem led by our very own Rhea Walker of the Office of the Attorney General.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Rhea. That was beautiful. I want to welcome everyone who has joined us both from inside and outside the department. It's a phenomenal crowd, standing room only, and it's an honor to be here with you all today. In this room are committed attorneys, leaders, and advocates, people who are advancing the work necessary to achieving Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision. I've been fortunate to call many of you my colleagues for the last several years. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to the Civil Rights Division for organizing this event celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy. As we reflect on Dr. King's vision, we acknowledge that his work and the work of his generation is far from finished. His dream did not stop at removing barriers to equality. He envisioned a society where all people enjoyed the benefits of equality and flourished together. His dream has inspired the Civil Rights Division for decades, and his words remain a guiding light. That light and that legacy, which are reflected in the department's mission and commitment to defending the civil rights of everyone, has been at the heart of the Civil Rights Division's work, and they will remain so. They will remain so because the mission of the department and the mission of the Civil Rights Division is to enforce the law in ways that safeguard the rights of everyone, especially those who have not enjoyed or do not now enjoy the full benefits of American democracy. The division has long been a rock in the fight for justice and equality. Anchored by its dedicated career professionals, it has remained steadfast in its pursuit of its mission, and it will keep doing so. The pace of the work and the progress I have seen the division make have been nothing short of astounding. Let's take hate crimes as just one example. We have charged more than 150 defendants with hate crimes over the last 4 years. We've participated in more than 135 hate crimes cases, and we've obtained more than 125 hate crimes convictions. These charges, cases, and convictions send a message, not only to would-be criminals, but to the public at large, including to potential victims. The Justice Department will not tolerate bias-motivated violence, and offenders will be held accountable. The division's pattern or practice investigations of police departments have also sent a message. They've shown in no uncertain terms that tragedies like the deaths of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Tyree Nichols cannot simply be pinned on problematic officers. These investigations have documented systemic failures and laid out clear roadmaps for reform. In police departments where consent decrees have had time to take effect, we've seen striking results. These cities see fewer uses of force, endure less violence, provide better training for officers, and safer streets for their communities. Police department culture can transform. Hate crimes prosecutions and pattern or practice investigations are just two of the many accomplishments of the Civil Rights Division. These accomplishments help move us forward into the world that Dr. King envisioned. But that world cannot and never has changed because of the work of government attorneys acting alone. So to the advocates in our midst, the grassroots leaders, organizers, educators, and activists, we need your engagement, your activism, and your vigilance. Thank you for everything you've already done, and thank you for all that you will continue to do to demand justice, shine a light on injustice, and push our nation toward the ideals that Dr. King so eloquently expressed. You have been essential partners, and I know that you will continue to stand with the department and for all Americans. Finally, before I close, I want to take a minute to express my gratitude to Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clarke for her steadfast leadership of the Civil Rights Division, which under her direction has done so much to advance equality for so many. Kristen, I've deeply appreciated our partnership and your tireless work. As we honor Dr. King's legacy today, let us also remember another important lesson that he taught us, that as we work to realize our shared vision, the path we take will not always be linear. We will experience setbacks. But of course, Dr. King was no stranger to setbacks. As he once said, we must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. May we take those words to heart and continue to work toward his vision. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Principal Deputy Associate Miser, for your thoughtful welcome remarks. And thank you also, Rhea, for your spirited and beautiful rendition of the national anthem. Another round of applause for them, please. And without further ado, I think I speak for everyone when I say I'm excited for today's program. Joining us next is Mark Morial, President and CEO of the National Urban League, an historic and legacy civil rights organization spanning the United States. President Morial has led the National Urban League since 2003. He's an author, an attorney, a former Louisiana state legislator, and a two-term mayor of New Orleans. Join me in welcoming President Morial.
Thank you. First of all, good afternoon. To General Garland, I know he's not here, but we are in his house. To Assistant Attorney General Clarke, the leadership team here at the Department of Justice, the frontline lawyers and support staff here at the department, particularly in the Civil Rights Division, let me just say thank you, thank you, thank you. When we were little, there was a song that my beloved mother would sing or play, and it went like this: all I want for Christmas is my 2 front teeth. All we wanted 4 years ago was a Justice Department and a Civil Rights Division and a leader who would enforce the law. The Civil Rights Division, birthed of the 1957 Civil Rights Act, was birthed in the crucible of incredible controversy. 3 years after Brown versus Board, in the shadow of the Little Rock 9, against the longest filibuster in American history by Strom Thurmond, President Johnson navigated what was, at that point, a bit of a watered-down bill through the Congress. And if you read Johnson's book, Master of the Senate, by Robert Caro, it talks about the ins and the outs of the passage of that bill. The first civil rights bill passed in the United States since the 1875 Civil Rights Act. Now, the importance of that bill is it put the weight and the hand of the Department of Justice and the federal government on the enforcement of the then nascent civil rights laws in this country. Now, in 2025, nearly 70 years later, the work of Kristen Clarke and this team at the Justice Department stand as a testament to what happens when good law is enforced by competent, qualified, passionate, serious lawyers. Serious lawyers. And all we ever asked for was to enforce the law. Why? Because as we look back in history, those laws were not birthed from think tanks. Those laws were not birthed from simply academic exercises. Those laws were birthed from sweat and toil and marches and sit-ins and political recriminations, accusations, and passion. Those laws represent the sweat, the blood, and the tears of the generations that came before us. And this Civil Rights Division understood not a choice, but an obligation to enforce those laws and make them real. Whether it was in policing or voting, Kristen Clarke and this Civil Rights Division never flinched. Whether it was when the winds were howling that this division should stand down, they said, no, we have an oath first to the Constitution and to what it means, and we have an obligation to our ancestors. Today, we stand at a moment when the very essence of those laws is under attack, where the very purpose of those laws is under attack. where there is a cynical movement to misinterpret under the guise of reinterpretation that even has currency among the mighty nine in the building over here. I'm here today to celebrate Kristen Clarke and to celebrate the long legacy of the Civil Rights Division, and for all of us to do the same at this moment. But to celebrate, to congratulate, is not enough. What is necessary is a reaffirmation of what this division and what the laws it is tasked with enforcing represent and mean, not just for history, but for the future of this nation, for the 21st century America, for America standing in the world as a citadel of democracy which respects and is not afraid of the concept of racial justice and gender justice, and yes, no tolerance for hate anywhere against anybody. This is where we are. We also are here at a moment when we celebrate the 96th birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King. And what is missing in many of the interpretations of history is the symphonic and harmonic relationship between protest and litigation, between protest and advocacy. The Montgomery bus boycott was an overlay of a challenge to Montgomery's ordinance by the 1955 NAACP. And it was when that three-judge court in Montgomery struck that ordinance down, and those buses got integrated, that protest ended. We need to understand that while Dr. King was protesting, he was also creating a public narrative about the righteousness and the morality of racial justice and a fair America. These things do not operate independently or separately, even if they're not coordinated. It's like rhythm. Sometimes it just matches. It's like harmony and melody of New Orleans jazz. I'm playing the sax and you playing the trumpet and you beating the drums, and somehow we're going to find that perfect beat. So I'm here today to also celebrate Martin Luther King and what he represents, not just his vision, not just his words, but his commitment as a man of action, a man who did things in furtherance of his vision. So, Kristen, I want to celebrate you. You have the indefatigable fire of Fannie Lou Hamer. You have the New York sophistication and accent of Shirley Chisholm. And you have the brilliant legal mind of Constance Baker Motley. May we celebrate your work and your commitment for a job well done. But let us commit that this is not an end. Let us commit that it is just a punctuation mark, and the next sentence, the next paragraph, and the next chapter begins today. God bless all of you who have been part of this work. All of us in the civil rights community celebrate it and join with it, and we are going to continue to be the wind beneath your wings here at the Justice Department as you fight ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Morial, for your powerful words and reflections. In 1963, Dr. King published Strength to Love, a collection of sermons representing an important and reflective stage of his life's work. He ponders whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are who you ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. There, Dr. King urged unity and mutuality within the movement. The year 1963, of course, was a pivotal one, including the Birmingham campaign, King's arrest, which led to the letter from Birmingham jail, and the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. 1963 is a year that embodies the power of strong coalition partnerships. In our next segment, we will reflect on the importance of interconnectedness. Now I welcome to the stage three powerful leaders across the civil rights landscape, fighting for justice, fairness, inclusion every day. First, Maya Berry, Executive Director of the Arab American Institute. Next, Jill Collin Jefferson, Founder and President of Julian. And Maria Town, President of the American Association of People with Disabilities. These three leaders will participate in a moderated discussion about partnership and leadership alongside Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clarke.
Good afternoon. Oh, it is so amazing and humbling to be here with all of you. I want to dive right into our panel discussion. As you've heard, we have three extraordinary leaders with us today who've been on the front lines of work across our nation to stand up for the rights of the Muslim and Arab American community, the rights of the victims of police violence, and the rights of people with disabilities. And I think I want to start with you, Maya Berry. Why don't you maybe share a word with our audience about some of the most pressing issues that you feel the MASA community faces today, and talk a little bit about how you've been able to partner with the Civil Rights Division to carry out this work.
Well, thank you so much, Assistant Attorney Clarke. I think the first thing I would point out, both representing Arab Americans as well as the American Muslim communities, is that there are Arab Americans who've been the subject of police brutality. There are Arab Americans who are disabled. There are Arab Americans who are black. There are Arab Americans who are women. So I think one of the most important things is to give the context of how much this is a collective fight that we're in, so to speak, in terms of the challenges that we face. I think that the long-term trajectory for us has been a community that's had a challenging relationship with law enforcement in terms of our civil rights and civil liberties. We saw that prior to 9/11 and certainly post 9/11. And one of the most important things that this Justice Department did at the time was to create an opportunity for Muslim, Arab, South Asians to come together for quarterly meetings here at the Civil Rights Division. Regrettably, there was a period where that didn't happen, and under your leadership, you immediately resumed that conversation and those meetings, and it's been a critical opportunity for us to be able to raise the concerns, whether it's on basic protection of rights, including, I can't talk about voting and the importance of that, language access, the importance of the way immigration law is and is not applied to certain communities, the threat of viewing a community under a national security lens versus the importance of protecting our civil rights equally. So all of those issues come to play, and to be here with a focus on justice is, I think, how we address everybody's rights in terms of protecting them.
And then let me turn next to the extraordinary Jill Jefferson, who joins us from Mississippi. Jill, you founded Julian, named after the extraordinary civil rights leader Julian Bond. Your organization attacks discrimination in all forms, using every tool in the toolbox, from advocacy to technology solutions. And you have used Southern-based organizing in a really remarkable way to help create trust with residents, especially in small rural areas in your state. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how trust that was built with people led to the residents of Lexington, Mississippi, rising up and reporting instances of discriminatory policing that you faced in your community.
Yes, of course, AG Clarke. So, a place to start that so many people don't know about is that there are places in America where if you are black or brown, when you reach the city limits or you reach the county limits, your constitutional rights cease to exist. These are places in the backwoods of Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, other places across the Midwest. These are places where the media doesn't go. These are places where most nonprofits don't know about. These are places where attorneys often don't go because there's no money to be made off the people there. And so, in these places, usually the biggest gang is the police. I am from a place like that. In places like that, there is no one to rescue you. And so, and the work that we did and the way that you and I met was through one of these places called Lexington, Mississippi. In Lexington, the police abuse was so rampant that they were using fines, using the jail as a debtor's prison. One woman, she was stopped in a roadblock. They made her get out of her car, they threw her to the ground, they tased her, they broke her finger and they arrested her, all because she owed a fine to the city. Another woman was pregnant. The chief of police purposely stuck his foot out in front of her and made her fall on her belly, and she suffered a miscarriage later that night. Another woman was an elderly black woman who the police broke into her house, maced her, took her to the fire station, which doubled as the police station, and hosed her down with a fire hose on full blast. If anybody remembers anything about Birmingham 1963, a fire hose on full blast can rip bark off of a tree. Imagine what it will do to human skin. So these are the stories that were coming out of Lexington, the things that we were dealing with when we came to you. And before we came to you, we tried everything. We went to state authorities. The Attorney General's office told us to call the FBI. We called the FBI over and over again, and they consistently sided with the police. And finally, I came to Washington, and you listened to us. You listened to what this community had to say. And in this, we partnered together when we got these stories from this community, embedding ourselves in the community, listening to what people have to say. In all of this work, it feels so often like you are shouting into an empty forest. But you heard us. You came and you listened. On a personal note, when I was in jail, I wrote a letter to you and the guards got it out to you. And you came, you helped, and you found this investigation, and these findings are incredible for moving forward. So I want to thank you so much for that, AG Clarke.
And I thank you for your courage and your work. I know that it has not been easy. And your voice and your advocacy prompted the extraordinary career attorneys of the Civil Rights Division to open a 2-year investigation into the police department. We found exactly what you told us, that fines and fees are imposed on poor people, mostly black, who cannot pay those fees, that there are illegal arrests, brutal and unnecessary force, people who are punished for their poverty. You talked a little bit about the findings. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you anticipate the department's work being helpful in your own work and advocacy to push for reform in Lexington and beyond?
Of course, of course. So, first off, you all investigated the smallest police department in the history of DOJ. You looked at the places where other people do not look. And what you have given us with this findings report is a blueprint that we can use to replicate this across small towns and rural areas in the United States. The thing about Lexington, the beautiful thing about this findings report, as you have noted, is that over 50% of the police forces in America look like Lexington's, with 10 officers or less. They face so many of the same issues. We can take this model that we have used in Lexington and we can replicate it. And beyond that, what I can say is that in replicating it and doing this work, the next 4 years we don't know what it's going to look like. But as John Lewis said, we cannot get lost in a sea of despair. This is a moment where it is time for a new strategic civil rights movement, not just protesting. And it's also time for a new Civil Rights Act. I would be remiss if I didn't say in all of this, especially because it's in honor of MLK and in honor of all of this, I think about John Doe and the Civil Rights Movement, how he calmed a mob after the assassination of Medgar Evers, how he marched ahead of the foot soldiers in the Selma to Montgomery March, how he prosecuted some of the most consequential hate crimes in history, and you have carried on that legacy. You have been the most consequential AAG since, and I appreciate you for that.
I want to turn, thank you so much, Jill. Again, thank you for the work that you do and for standing up for people in your community who deserve so much better and so much more. I want to turn now to the great Maria Town, who leads the American Association of People with Disabilities. They are on the front lines of some of the most important work happening across the country for people with disabilities. And in the last 4 years, we have been working in partnership together on many, many issues, working to breathe life into the Americans with Disabilities Act's integration mandate under the Supreme Court's Olmstead decision. We won a trial in Florida and have secured settlements around the country to address findings in those states. We've also enforced the ADA with respect to discriminatory emergency response systems that rely on law enforcement as the default response for people experiencing behavioral health crises. And you've been such an important partner in this work. I think this work has been a critical part of how we've gone about the business of trying to promote constitutional policing in this country. I want to ask you to talk a little bit about how the community views the impact of these wins and the impact of some of the work we've done in this space.
Well, it is an honor to be here today to celebrate the work of this department, of this division, especially in the context of Dr. King's birthday, and to celebrate your leadership, Assistant Attorney General Clarke. You know, people with disabilities have fought for decades for the right to exist in public safely. We have fought to exist in community, and a key part of what it means to be in community is to have the ability to ask for help and have those requests be met with support and affirmation rather than with harm. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. In Florida, families of children with disabilities and complex medical needs, when they reached out to the state for assistance and for care for their children, the requests of these families were met with, your child is too disabled. Your child's needs are too significant. The only option that you have is to place them in a nursing home. We're talking toddlers. It should go without saying that children deserve to be raised with their families and in the communities that love them. And this department said, of course that's true. You pursued a court order that you won, and the state was required to create a transition plan to deinstitutionalize the hundreds of children that had gone into nursing homes over a number of years. And it was required to create new resources for families so they could make informed decisions about supporting their children and supporting the overall goals of their family. Now, we're talking about this in the context of kids, but honestly, the same is true for any disabled person, no matter how old they are, right? This means that older adults with disabilities also should not be forced into nursing homes or other institutions and should be able to receive the care and support they need to live at home. And it has been amazing to see the Civil Rights Division take on claims across the country to address this institutional bias and to make Olmsted real. Now, connecting this to the issue of emergency supports that you mentioned, right? So many of the deaths at the hands of police are people with disabilities. In fact, recent data showed that 50% of the people who die at the hands of police are people with disabilities. And often, police engage because they are responding to a call, not of crime or wrongdoing, but of someone who is in crisis. A family may call for support for their 15-year-old autistic son, who then, within a matter of moments, winds up dead. It was incredible for me to hear you know yourself that police were not only an inadequate response to mental health crisis, but also unsafe, noting that people should, if they call 911 in response to a heart attack, they get an ambulance. Why shouldn't the same thing be true for mental or behavioral health? Ultimately, what this trend has caused is that people with disabilities and their families who need help don't seek it because they're afraid of risking further harm. And it makes not only all of us as individuals, but also our communities less safe. The department has taken on this trend in places from DC to Minnesota, and it has been amazing to see. It has not only been transformational, but it has also been validating. You know, the Americans with Disabilities Act is 34 years old. The Olmsted decision is 25. And yet we still face these systemic barriers. We are still forced to be segregated. And what your leadership has done has affirmed that the inclusive reality that disabled people have believed in for so long is possible, and we have the tools that we need to create it with the right leaders. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to acknowledge the leadership of Jennifer Mathis and Rebecca Bond, who have interfaced with the community and helped to really break some new ground that hopefully will help to save lives in the road ahead. Maya, I want to come back to you. We've been talking about the need for responsive policing, but let me pivot now to talk a little bit about hate crimes, because we've most certainly seen a surge in the reports of hate crimes and impacting the Arab community, also the Asian American community, the Black American community, and more. Wondering if you can talk a little bit about your work to build more responsive policing and how that can lead to more effective prosecution of hate crimes in the road ahead.
Yeah, regrettably, the surge in hate. I'll elevate this. Regrettably, the surge in hate that we've seen is targeted all communities, as you all know too well here in this building. And one of the barriers to improving hate crime reporting really is the relationship of those communities to local law enforcement. And I think when you hear stories like this from my colleagues, one of the most important things is that this Justice Department not only named those issues, but tackled those issues so that communities can begin to improve their relationships. I think the first would be the idea that, well, the importance of the Attorney General identifying hate crime as a level 1 threat for the FBI as early as 2021. Prioritizing our country's response to hate was pivotal across the board. It was certainly the individual FBI offices, but it was the U.S. Attorney's offices, it was the Communities Against Hate program. There are many things that this department did to make sure that we understood hate crime is not something that it would tolerate, and the figures of charges and prosecutions bear that out. But I think the other piece of it that's important is to improve individual communities' ability to report hate. Something as important as creating a law enforcement accountability database so that the department understanding there are issues there will give signals to local communities that they see the problem, there are remedies in place, and we will do what we can to overcome those barriers. So there's many things that need to be done, including getting to the point of mandatory hate crime reporting. The transition to NIBRS has been very significant. So there's a lot there, but the improvement of communities trusting their government as one responsive to those needs, and the idea that, I mean, it gets said a lot here, but I'll say it, protect and serve is equally applied to everyone.
Yeah. So as we close out this discussion, I want to ask each of you to maybe take a moment to just reflect on Dr. King's legacy and the work that each of you are engaged in your communities. It truly is a beacon of hope for all, but talk a little bit about where you see the work going in the road ahead. And Maria, why don't we start with you?
So this is probably going to sound very technical, but I want to shout out one of the most significant things that I think has happened during this administration, which is standards for website accessibility. How many of you can honestly say in the past 24 hours that you have not used a website or app? No one. I'm a DC resident, and I recently learned that DC got its first website in 1996, almost 30 years ago. And we just got regulatory standards for website accessibility for states and local governments in spring of 2024. So really, that does deserve a round of applause. Because what this means is people with disabilities will have equal access to information about voting, emergencies. We no longer have to spend hours and hours and hours just trying to pay our bills. And it really creates a path towards what will hopefully be a Title III rule on website accessibility. So all covered entities under the ADA will have to become compliant. And technology holds such promise for disabled people, but we will never be able to fully appreciate that promise if we don't establish accessibility and inclusion standards in this sphere. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, what I think is ahead, first off, I think all the leaders need to come together and strategize a new civil rights movement. We need a new Civil Rights Act. There are so many rights, so many things that are left out, so many people who are left out and forgotten. And what I also really hope is next that you have ushered in is women leading the charge in this. Because as we know, during the civil rights movement, things were not perfect. Women had to take a back seat. Only Mahalia Jackson was allowed to even touch the podium at the March on Washington in 1963. It has always been women to lead the charge in this work, yet we are always relegated to the back. And so I thank you for seeing us, for having this panel, and I hope that the media, I hope that the nation sees this work that we are doing, because ignoring us ignores the communities, ignores the voices of so many people. And so you open the door to make that happen. So I hope that this is the next step.
Yeah. Thank you, Jill.
What an incredible honor to just be here with all of you. So let's start with that. I was telling a colleague that I was being a bit too informal in my comments in this building, and I was like, check myself before I come on the stage in front of a microphone. So I'm going to try to answer what I think is an incredibly important question with care. As our country struggles with our democracy, our small d democracy, and what it means and how we move forward in our institutions, I think there's also an element here in terms of struggling with what it means to be an American and who gets to be an American, who gets to identify as an American, who is not targeted. And I think that is the challenge that certainly we are thinking a lot about right now, but I think all communities are. If you want to have a policy of mass deportations, I don't know how a colleague at your local McDonald's is not going to, find a way to target the black and brown employees of that institution. I don't know how a young student on campus advocating for what they believe is right is not going to be targeted. I don't know if we don't prioritize hate crime laws and enforcement against all communities, no matter how they identify, no matter who they are. I think that's the trepidation and the heaviness that I am certainly experiencing working in a civil rights advocacy organization at this time. And like my colleagues have echoed, it's been incredible to have a Justice Department that has prioritized our laws. That was exactly right. We have laws. We've simply asked for their enforcement and to apply them equally.
The federal government does not get this work done on its own. We do it in partnership with extraordinary leaders like these three women. And, Mark Morial talked about Constance Baker Motley and Shirley Chisholm. You all proudly carry their torches forward. I thank you for all that you do to make our nation more just and more equitable. It's been such a privilege to get to work alongside you. Please join me in thanking these three extraordinary leaders. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now continuing this message of interconnectedness and partnership, I'm going to call up our next three speakers all at once. And these speakers are special. They're three senior officials in federal government. First is Aaron Kiak, Deputy Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism at the U.S. Department of State, speaking on behalf of Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt, an historian, academic, and author who was confirmed by the U.S. Senate in 2022 to serve as Special Envoy to advance U.S. foreign policy to counter anti-Semitism around the world. Next, I will call Catherine Lehman, Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education, who has served in this role twice. She was first confirmed by the U.S. Senate in 2013 and again in 2021. Between these appointments, from 2016 to 2021, she chaired the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights and served as Legal Affairs Secretary to the Governor of California from 2019 to 2021. And finally, Director Rohit Chopra, who joins us from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, a unit charged with protecting families and businesses from illegal practices, ensuring fairness, transparency, and competitiveness in the market for consumer financial products and services. Prior to this role, Director Chopra was confirmed by the U.S. Senate as a commissioner on the Federal Trade Commission in 2018. I welcome you to the stage, and first to the podium is Aaron Kiak.
Well, first, Ambassador Lipstadt deeply regrets that she wasn't able to make it. And I do see a lot of Washington, D.C. experience in the room. But except for my fellow deputies and former deputies, it's hard to understand the unique and esteemed responsibility of filling in for a principal and being eminently disappointing. So thank you for having me here today. Dr. Martin Luther King Day reminds us of the enduring struggle for justice and equality. His unwavering commitment to justice and equality paved the way for civil rights efforts, as we've been hearing, and he held true to the creed that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, as a guiding principle in countering all forms of hate, of course, including anti-Semitism. His legacy has influenced national efforts to combat hate, and that also helped inform our administration's first ever national strategy to combat anti-Semitism. It's a strategy that includes 100 concrete actions for government agencies and civil society, embodying the values Dr. King championed of taking action to counter societal hatred. And of course, Kristen embodies Dr. King's legacy in her fight against all forms of hate. And I just want to speak briefly about her fight against this particular form of hate, anti-Semitism. So with Kristen Clarke at the helm, Civil Rights Division, and just Kristen, I just want to make sure I go through the full list, because there were some times when we were talking during our Senate confirmation where not everyone understood her full commitment. She's not just committed to it, she's a champion in the fight against anti-Semitism. And in her role, she's combated hate crimes that target people and communities because of race, ethnicity, or national origin. She's confronted acts of violence targeting Jewish communities, including convicting the men who murdered congregants of the Tree of Life at Chabad in Poway. She's prosecuted members of white supremacist groups for victimizing black and Jewish people by vandalizing properties and defacing synagogues with neo-Nazi symbols in Michigan and New Jersey. She's prosecuted online violent threats to commit mass shootings targeting Jewish people in Michigan and New York. The Civil Rights Division has also vigorously protected religious land use rights by enforcing laws that prevent religious discrimination in schools, housing, places of public accommodation, prisons, and workplaces. The Civil Rights Division has built trust across diverse and underserved communities, such as launching the United Against Hate Community Outreach and Engagement Program. The program has reached more than 18,000 people in all 94 U.S. Attorney offices. The division has convened stakeholder meetings for Jewish leaders, Muslim leaders, Arabs, South Asian, Sikh, and Hindu community leaders to engage directly with the Civil Rights Division and its attorneys. Also, I just want to take a point of personal privilege to give a shout out to a small group of fellow ninjas sitting right over there who fought like hell to make sure that Kristen got through her Senate confirmation process. Without that kind of work, none of this is possible. So we want to carry, you know what, actually, why don't you all stand up real quick? And then we can applaud them again. We must carry forward MLK's legacy to counter hatred and promote justice. And may God bless Kristen's work and all of our work to make the world a little less imperfect for everyone. Thank you.
And let me just take a moment. The work we do in the Civil Rights Division is made possible because of the laws that Congress passes, the federal civil rights laws that we use to do our work each and every day. All of them pass with tremendous bipartisan support. But allow me to just take a moment to acknowledge members of Congress with us today. One of the ninjas, the great Senator Klobuchar of Minnesota. House Member Mary Gay Scanlon of Pennsylvania, and former Senator Doug Jones of Alabama.
Well, it's a little tough to follow all the love for the members of Congress who have given us the laws that we celebrate, but I will try. Dr. King reminded our nation in his letter from Birmingham jail that, quote, injustice must be rooted out by strong, persistent, and determined action. This nation trusts the federal civil rights agencies to take that strong, persistent, and determined action. It has been my deep pleasure to earn that trust together with Assistant Attorney General Clarke and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, each of whom has answered Dr. King's call for service with expertise, with commitment, and with fortitude to meet what this time demands of us. We, together in federal service, meet the legal challenge exactly where we are, finding ways to protect racial justice as expansively as Title VI has promised, but not yet delivered for all its existence to date. From issuing joint guidance between the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, which I lead, and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division regarding lawful use of race when opening doors of opportunity in selective college admissions following the Supreme Court's decision in Students for Fair Admissions, and issuing a joint resource regarding non-discrimination with respect to race and national origin in imposing discipline in schools, to the spade work of ensuring that the Title VI guarantee is the actual experience at the desktop for students in schools all over this nation, and thousands of case resolutions in recent years. It has been the joy of my professional life to work in active partnership with our colleagues at the Department of Justice to secure relief for millions of students in the nation's schools, so they learn in Congress' full promise that no person shall experience discrimination on the basis of race by recipients of federal funds. Making good on the guarantee Congress enacted at Dr. King's strong urging, so that, in his words, the Negro and his compatriots for self-respect and human dignity will not be denied. I know in this week alone that we at the Office for Civil Rights at the Department of Education continue, and the Department of Justice continues, to negotiate needed change in the nation's schools to fulfill the federal guarantee against race discrimination, including with respect to Black girls who experience harsher and more severe discipline in a school than their non-Black peers, and with respect to race and national origin-based harassment that impedes access to learning for Black students and Jewish students and Arab students, among so many others. The important work continues, and I thank the Department of Justice, as well as my career colleagues at the Office for Civil Rights at the Department of Education, who will remain after I leave to fulfill Dr. King's crucial legacy for racial and economic justice. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let me ask the Assistant Attorney General to sit here. I never want to turn my back to her. So, we have been through some crises in the past 20 years, and you know, we heard earlier about the passage of the Civil Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, and other really important laws. And you know, every year we got a little bit of improvement in shrinking that racial wealth gap and other disparities. But in 2008, a subprime mortgage crisis actually wiped away all of those gains. Trillions of dollars disappearing, overwhelmingly falling in neighborhoods that were the same exact ones where those red lines were drawn. And one of the things that we always have to remember about civil rights is it's about power and who has power and who doesn't. And whether we like it or not, in our country, money is inextricably linked to power. We have a system that we call the American dream. And we heard on the last panel from Maya, what does it mean now to be an American, and who is that dream for? So when we think about people's economic lives, the bare ability to put a roof over their head, to feed their family, we do not want it to be tainted by the pickpocket of discrimination. So one of the things that the Assistant Attorney General made crystal clear is that civil rights enforcement is not just the purview of the Department of Justice. It is the purview of every single agency in our federal government. And that really means that agencies like mine, the CFPB, we have to use our tools and our weaponry together to prosecute those crimes. And I'm really proud to say that under Assistant Attorney General Clarke, we have once again prosecuted modern-day redlining. Redlining drains the wealth from too many neighborhoods, and really, we cannot live in a fictional life where we think that that is part of the past. And one of our other goals was to think about the future. And there is something that we also focused on. It's called digital redlining. That's the use of algorithms and artificial intelligence to make predictions about people that have huge impacts on their lives. Algorithms can make determinations on whether you get that apartment, whether you get that loan, or even whether you're considered for that job application. And all of this technology is not something that can escape our law. There is no special technology or fancy exemption in our nation's civil rights laws. So just as Mayor Morial said, this is not a time when something is ending. It is a time where we keep going. We keep forging ahead on what we need to do, and we use moments like this to redouble our commitment to it. Let me just share one story of our first ever redlining action against a non-bank mortgage company. These were the ones that really creeped up in the years before the financial crisis. The Assistant AG and myself, as well as state attorneys general from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware, went to West Philadelphia, the places and the neighborhoods near fancy Ivy League schools, big, powerful hospitals, and we found a consistent pattern of redlining by a company owned by the Berkshire Hathaway conglomerate. We prosecuted them, and now, today, those residents, not just in West Philadelphia, but in Wilmington and Camden, have new opportunities to actually access some housing. We have to remember that the housing crisis we face today is also a civil rights crisis too, and it means that we must continue to do more. And afterward, the Assistant AG and I took a train back to Washington, and we made sure that no matter if the two of us were in our chairs or not, we are never going to let people stop fighting for making sure that people can get a loan and that people can have the dream of homeownership. So I want to thank the Assistant Attorney General for all that she has done to make sure each and every one of us is living up to our responsibilities to discharge our duties to the Constitution for everybody. So thank you so much.
Thank you to Deputy Special Envoy Kiak, to Director Chopra, and Assistant Secretary Lehman. Next, I have a surprise for Assistant Attorney General Clarke, and this is a thank you from various partners across the civil rights community. What you'll see is a video montage about the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King and the contributions that you made to his legacy of civil rights.
Dr. King dedicated his life to the pursuit of equal treatment under the law with the civil rights movement, and it continues today.
His quote, his very famous quote, "The arc of the moral universe is long but extends towards justice." We have certainly seen that in Kristen and her work with her team in pursuing hate crime prosecution, dedication, reporting, and investigation, training as well. It's been really remarkable to have Kristen in her place. We look forward to seeing what her next adventure will be.
Thank you so much, Kristen, for all your support and everything that you do to protect America, its citizens, its visitors, and everybody who wants to be in America.
Thank you, and thank you for including us in this remarkable day.
Greetings. I'm Dr. Leona Tate, founder and executive director of the Leona Tate Foundation for Change Incorporated and the TEP Center in New Orleans. As I reflect on Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy, I think about how his fight for civil rights directly influenced the trajectory of my life. Here in New Orleans on November 14, 1960, my parents made a difficult decision to place me at the forefront of a battle for equal education. My parents allowed Dr. King's example in fighting for the inclusion of all people. Now more than ever before, his legacy is a constant reminder that we all must continue to work towards a more positive and peaceful world. The struggle is not over, and Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clarke took up the mantle in the fight for equity and justice early in her career. Under her leadership, the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice has continued to protect the rights of individuals and communities that are often left out of the narrative. AAG Clarke, thank you for your service and for your support in the work that the Leona Tate Foundation is doing in preserving the history for school desegregation and continuing the fight for equity in education.
Hello, Madam Clarke. This is Tori Prevost, and this is my mother.
How you do, dear? This is Dorothy Prevost.
And we are the family of Tessie Prevost. As you know, Tessie Prevost was one of the 4 little girls who desegregated public schools in the Deep South in 1960, also known as the New Orleans 4. We're here to just give you a wonderful farewell. My sister didn't get a chance to meet you, but I'm sure if she would have, she was aware of your work and very proud of what you were doing. And if she was here, she would say that the sentiments would be the same as we are, to send you a wonderful farewell. Martin Luther King's legacy changed the trajectory for Black people. It changed the world. He changed the world, actually. He gave Black people the permission to believe that this is our country too, that we were not second-class citizens. We have rights and privileges, and we should fight for those rights and privileges just like any other citizen. And the work that you have done to carry out his legacy has been tremendous. We are so proud of you. He opened doors for people like you, like my sister, like my parents, and he just made us believe that we can fight. We have to fight. We have to keep
up the good fight. And we know that in your next endeavor, you will continue to fight. And we look forward to see what you will be doing in your future. We just want to say farewell and thank you for everything you've done.
And this is Dorothy Prevost, Tori and Tessie's mother, and we're praying for you and just keep up the good work.
Okay.
And may God bless you.
Farewell, my dear.
Hi, I'm Reverend Al Sharpton, President of National Action Network. I joined the Civil Rights Movement in Brooklyn, New York when I was 12 years old, the year Dr. Martin Luther King was killed. And through these decades of work, I've never seen anyone more committed, more consistent, and more productive than Kristen Clarke. I watched her work in the state of New York and when she went to the Justice Department, and the kind of work, the kind of cases, the volume of stuff she managed, got done, and pushed through is in of itself historic. This country is a better place because Kristen Clarke was in the Justice Department. Families got justice, but more important, society knew that they would be held accountable. One of the things that I thank God for is He gave us a Kristen Clarke, because all of the marching and the rallying outside can only be validated and achieve change if you have a Kristen Clarke on the inside. God bless her, and God, we thank you for giving her to us.
Kristen, congratulations on an amazing tenure as Associate Attorney General. When I think about MLK and his letter from a Birmingham jail, where he said that there are laws that are neutral on their face but unjust in their application, I think of your leadership, where you have shone a light on unjust laws. You have challenged and prosecuted the unjust application of neutral laws. And importantly, you've used the law to secure justice for communities that are underserved and disenfranchised across the country. So on behalf of LDF, I thank you for your service and wish you all the best going forward.
I'm Mark Morial, and I lead the National Urban League. And I want to say on behalf of the entire civil rights community, thank you, Kristen Clarke, for a job well done. And thank you, Civil Rights Division, for upholding the vision and the mission and the work of the Civil Rights Division. Kristen, you brought clarity, you brought competence, you brought balance, you brought professionalism back to the Civil Rights Division. And we deeply appreciate your incredible work. I ask everyone to remember, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And the work of civil rights is the work of justice, a founding principle of this great nation. Thank you for a job well done.
What does Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy mean to me? It means freedom. It means justice. It means fairness for all. And Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clarke has continued to live that legacy through the work she has done over these few years at the Department of Justice, fighting for voting rights, fighting for criminal justice reform, fighting for fairness for all. And we thank her for that service. Thank you, Kristen.
Dr. King's legacy reminds us that liberation is a participatory endeavor. We won't get there to that mountaintop by sitting on our hands and just pointing fingers. It takes real work, rolling up your sleeves. That's exactly what my good friend, Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights Kristen Clarke, does every day, and she has for so very long. She gets results. She works hard, not just in the halls of power, but all throughout the nation and communities nationwide. One of the most accessible leaders, one of the most effective people you'll ever meet. Thank you so much for all that you've done.
The Torah teaches, tzedek tzedek tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue. Justice is said twice to teach us that we must always pursue justice, and we must do so in a just way. This is the legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clarke. This is also your legacy. You have pursued justice with compassion, with dignity, with equity, and in collaboration. On behalf of National Council of Jewish Women and the entire Jewish community, I want to thank you for your tireless pursuit of justice for all. Mazel tov.
Dr. King's life and legacy continues to have a profound impact on all of us. For me, it's been that it's rooted in justice, what he called the presence of justice. Assistant Attorney General Clarke has led with that presence of justice in mind in all of her work, whether it's another indictment of a hate crime, whether it's a consent decree for a pattern or practice investigation in a local police department, whether it's her leadership in the policy space. She has led with the idea, with the importance of securing justice for all, and I am so eternally grateful for her leadership.
Dr. King said that he wanted his legacy to be that he loved and served humanity, and that he was a drum major for justice. And when I think about those words, Kristen, I certainly think about you. I'm humbled on behalf of the National Fair Housing Alliance and our 200 members throughout the nation to be able to thank you for your hard work, your dedication, and steadfast commitment to enforcing our nation's civil rights laws. Thank you.
The legacy of Martin Luther King to me is his profound quote that is somewhat of a North Star for me when he says that the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands at in times of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at in times of challenge and controversy. We're in some challenging times, my sisters and brothers, and thank God that General Kristen Clarke and the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice always stood on the right side of history. Thank you on behalf of George Floyd's family. Thank you on behalf of Breonna Taylor's family. Thank you on behalf of Ahmaud Arbery's family. Thank you on behalf of Tyree Nichols' family and so many other families that you gave a voice to while you were given this awesome power as the Civil Rights Division in the Department of Justice. History will remember you fondly, Kristen Clarke, and all of your team.
Hello there. When I think about Martin Luther King Jr.'s civil rights legacy, the first thing I think of is the beloved community, a vision where everyone can share in the wealth of our nation and of our world, and a vision where all forms of discrimination are replaced with inclusion. The beloved community was not a utopian ideal for Dr. King. It was a realistic, achievable goal, and Assistant Attorney General Clarke's work has made the possibility of a beloved community a reality for so many people with disabilities. With her leadership, the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division has taken aggressive action in ensuring people with disabilities can live safely in our homes and in our communities and not in institutions. And she has ensured that when disabled people are in community, we can contribute meaningfully to our country's larger civic body by making voting, employment, and mental health services more inclusive and accessible. Thank you, Assistant Attorney General Clarke.
I bring greetings on behalf of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, NOBLE. My name is Dwayne Crawford, and I'm Executive Director. When I think of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., what I think about is his commitment to service, his commitment to justice, and his real commitment to America's promise. When I think of the work and dedication by Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clarke, I thank her for ensuring equity and fairness and justice and accountability for all of America's citizens. I want to thank her so much for her hard work and for doing an amazing job, and I wish you Godspeed in your future endeavors.
To achieve real justice in this country, passing laws isn't enough. We need active and effective enforcement to make sure states, cities, and towns actually follow those laws. Under the leadership of Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clarke, The Civil Rights Division has worked to uphold Dr. King's vision of a society defined by racial justice and equality. From efforts to preserve access to the ballot box and combat voter suppression, to ensure law enforcement accountability, to prevent abuses in detention facilities and prisons, and to hold individuals and groups accountable for hate-motivated crimes. Kristen Clarke has made the Civil Rights Division an effective partner and vitally important agency. We are grateful for her leadership and vision. She will be missed.
Dr. King believed in the intersection of civil rights and economic rights. That's what he was focused on. Too often we don't talk about that. So the work that Kristen Clarke has done with the Department of Justice and the Civil Rights Division has focused on both of those. When you look at the prosecution of cops, when you look at jailers, when you look at folks who committed hate crimes, but also when you look at mortgage lending, when you look at racial discrimination, when it comes to redlining, those things all merge together. And so the last 4 years have been hugely critical. So congratulations to Kristen Clarke and her team for an amazing work, and I dare say the most effective Department of Justice Civil Rights Division since the days of Robert F. Kennedy.
In that video, you heard from civil rights leaders and community members alike, reflecting on the period of civil rights within which we currently sit. The enduring message that I received from that video is that courage and selflessness, even and especially during difficult times, are vitally important. They're important traits that we each can embody when doing our part in pursuit of this work. In 1957, following the Montgomery bus boycott, and as Dr. King's leadership philosophy of love, service, and nonviolence took hold, he delivered a sermon at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. In that sermon, he posits, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what have you done for others? 10 years later, in 1967, at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference's annual convening, Dr. King said that change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability, but comes through continuous struggle. And so we must straighten our backs and work for freedom. As we pivot towards the end of tonight's program, we will focus on Dr. King's philosophy of leadership, requiring relentless effort. To help us do that, our next speaker will be Attorney Ben Crump. For years, Attorney Crump has represented victims and families specializing in civil rights and catastrophic personal injury cases. And he will be followed by Derek Johnson, President and CEO of the venerable NAACP. President Johnson, who is an attorney, guest lecturer at Harvard Law School, and an adjunct professor at Tougaloo College, has served as president since 2017, leading the organization's fight to lift systemic racial barriers to ensure public policy rooted in equity. First, Attorney Crump.
Like the other gentleman, can't have you to my back. I'm very humbled to be here at this great institution, the Department of Justice, but not just because it's an institution, but for what the ideals the institution stands for. This notion of liberty and justice for all. This notion, equal justice under the law. And this notion that my personal hero, Thurgood Marshall, always declared, making the Constitution real for all Americans, whether black, white, or brown. That's why I'm humbled to be here in this institution, the ideals for which it stands. I'm also humbled because we're on the eve of Dr. King's birthday, where we remember the greatest characters of our nation, of our society, of our community, but most importantly, of humanity. And I am humbled to give flowers to my dear friend and sister, AAG Kristen Clarke. You know, Roland, I have with me a young, brilliant African-American attorney who works with my law firm. She was the chair of the state of California's Reparations Commission, Attorney Camila Moore. And I remember talking to her, Kristen, and, you know, sometimes when you're friends and you don't really completely understand how revered your friends are, Derek, Janaea, you know, many of you out there. But I was taken aback when Camila said, man, Assistant Attorney General Clarke, she's such a historic trailblazer. I mean, you are inspiring so many young people, the next generation of great civil rights lawyers, especially Jill, I would say, inspiring so many young women to be the next great champions of justice. And that's why I'm very humbled when I think about it. I think about Dr. Chavis, and to many of you, when we fight in the civil rights community, we often said, man, I imagine what it would be like if a person who was on the front lines with us doing the grassroots civil rights work became chair of the Civil Rights Division. Can you imagine what we could accomplish? Could you just imagine what we could accomplish? And my God, you've accomplished so much in these mere 4 years. AAG Clarke, I think about Dr. King oftentimes when we talk about the law and how we use this instrument. I believe that we should always use it for an instrument of good, but there are many who believe it should be used as a weapon of oppression. Dr. King said in his letter from the Birmingham jail, which I believe is one of the most incredible documents ever written in the course of human history, Ryan. In that jail, everybody remembers he said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. However, I submit to you, my brothers and sisters, I think that wasn't the only profound statements that he made in that letter. I submit that the most profound statement he said in that letter was when he talked about just because they tell us it's legal, that don't make it right. He said, we must remember everything Hitler did to the Jews in Germany, they said was legal, but that didn't make it right. He said, we must remember that they said slavery was legal, but that didn't make it right. He said, we must remember they said segregation was legal, but that didn't make it right. And he said, everything they did to that little boy in Money, Mississippi, they said was legal. But Dr. King said, but that doesn't make it right. I thank God that when the local officials said what they did to George Floyd was legal, that Kristen Clarke and the Civil Rights Division said that don't make it right. When they said what they did to Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky was legal, that Kristen Clarke and the Civil Rights Division said, but that don't make it right. What they did to Ahmaud Arbery when they lynched him in Brunswick, Georgia, and they said that was legal, that Kristen Clarke and the Civil Rights Division said that didn't make it right. And when they beat Tyree Nichols to death, 5 black police officers in Memphis, Tennessee, and they tried to say that it was legal, that Kristen Clarke and the Civil Rights Division said, but that doesn't make it right. And now Sonia Massey, Springfield, Illinois. Roland, I know you showed the video on your show many times. Derek, I know that's where NAACP first started after the race riots. It reminds us that we still have so much work to do. National Fair Housing Center camp, I know we got so much work to do. Kristen Clarke, I said it on many occasions, and I heard some of my colleagues say it. Save Robert Kennedy and what they did back in the 60s with Dr. King and Congressman Lewis and Fannie Lou Hamer and others. I cannot think of a Justice Department and Civil Rights Division that has done more to make the Constitution real for all Americans.
Good afternoon. There was an elder who was explaining to me the definition of character. And he said that character is what you do in the dark when no one is watching. And some people have character while other people are characters. I know now I can go back to that elder and give an example of someone who has character, and that is Kristen Clarke. Someone who truly in the dark, because I don't think she's asleep. Because if you're like me, you receive notices from this office all the time, 24 hours. Which is a beautiful thing because for individuals like Janae or Damon, they can do the other part of the civil rights work and not have to act as if there was a civil rights division and advocating for the work that needs to get done because we had a civil rights lawyer sitting in the seat doing the work with character. The measurement of people should always be done not based on their ego, but based on their outcomes. The level of integrity, the level of care, the level of concern by which she managed this office is something that during my lifetime is unmatched. In fact, she led with both character, integrity, but I've known her for a while and watched her before I knew her. She have operated with perseverance. Whether as an activist in law school, a lawyer for LDF, for the New York Attorney General's office, at the Lawyers Committee, and now in this seat that she's sitting in, that's over 30 years of perseverance, of doing what was right and just to ensure that all Americans are afforded equal protection under the law. Kristen, thank you. Because I know in this next iteration of your work, it will still be done with character, with integrity, and you will persevere as you work on behalf of many Americans who need your advocacy, your voice, your strategic thinking, and your commitment. And I hope in this next iteration, which I told you on the phone, go make a lot of money now. Because you've been on this side a long time. But wherever you land, I look forward to continue to work with you, to partner with you, and be inspired by all that you have done and that you are still to do. Thank you.
Thank you again to Attorney Crump and President Johnson. And now we move to our featured speaker of the afternoon, Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clarke. In 2021, Kristen Clarke was confirmed by the U.S. Senate to become the Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division at the U.S. Department of Justice, where she has steadfastly led this division to protect civil rights for all people in this country. On her confirmation day, she made history as the first black woman to take the helm and lead federal civil rights enforcement. The daughter of Jamaican immigrants from Brooklyn, New York, she has carried the torch to light the way as a lifelong civil rights attorney, starting her career right here in the Civil Rights Division, the very office she now leads. She previously led the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law as its executive director, and before that, led the Civil Rights Bureau at the New York State Attorney General's office. Before I pass the microphone to her, I want to take a point of personal privilege. Serving as her Chief of Staff and Senior Counsel, I have witnessed the care and concern for community that she brings to this work every day, day in and day out. Her desire to do absolutely everything she can is what I will remember most about working with her. Late night text messages or phone calls included. I believe her work ethic can be captured by a portion of Dr. King's 1960 speech at Spelman College. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But do whatever you can do. You have to keep moving forward. This is a message about the enduring hope through struggle during uncertain times. And it is my hope that when we part ways tonight, that we take that message with us to do all that we can every day, just as Kristen Clarke does. I now welcome to the stage Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice, Kristen Clarke.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. I'm so moved by this program. I'm going to try and keep it together here as we close things out. My remarks today are in tribute to the extraordinary career staff of the Civil Rights Division, who are the ones who really make the magic happen. I want to ask all of the current and former members of the Civil Rights Division, and I see that there are many here, to please stand and be recognized. It is a profound honor to be with you today, reflecting on the enduring legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a great American whose vision, courage, and commitment to justice transformed our nation's moral and social fabric. As we close today's tribute to his life and monumental contributions he made, we also celebrate our own hard work to advance his dream. A dream of a nation where equality, justice, and fairness are not just aspirational ideals, but tangible realities for us all. Dr. King was a visionary. He believed deeply in the promise of America, even as he recognized the profound inequities and systemic racism that plagued our society. He fought tirelessly for civil rights, practiced nonviolent resistance, and embraced the inherent dignity of every human being. His leadership during the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s ignited a fire that continues to burn in the hearts of those who seek justice and equality. It burns in our own hearts. But as we've seen today, the work Dr. King began is far from done. When President Biden nominated me on the morning of January 6th, 2021, and the Senate confirmed me for this role on the one-year anniversary of George Floyd's death, our country was in the throes of unrest, with echoes of the nation's earlier civil rights movement sounding in the streets. Black people had been tragically killed. Ahmaud Arbery died for the apparent offense of jogging while black. Breonna Taylor died on the floor of her apartment because of an illegitimate search warrant. George Floyd died with a police officer kneeling on his neck. And not just black people felt the brunt of prejudice and violence. The previous year, COVID had unleashed hate-fueled violence targeting Asian Americans. Anti-Semitic and Islamophobic violence were also skyrocketing. The targeting of LGBTQI people, especially children, was rampant. But the proliferation of violence and hate sparked a counter-reaction. Protesters of all stripes mounted more than 10,000 demonstrations. Yellow paint on the streets reminded people that Black lives matter. Activists toppled Confederate statues. Mississippi removed the Confederate symbol from its flag. Corporations, states, and localities designated Juneteenth a holiday. Washington's football team shed its racist name and logo. And in a seemingly small move that actually matters, publications began to capitalize Black when using it to describe people. This change acknowledged the shared history, identity, and community among people who identify as Black. It seemed to suggest understanding by institutions that previously privileged an archaic style over a minor edit that cost nothing. It hinted at respect and a willingness to confront a collective history of racism and injustice. All welcome, overdue, and symbolic steps, but none of them enough to fully realize Dr. King's dream. I stepped into this role with great pride to return to the place where I started my career as a baby lawyer in 2000, but also with a sense of the urgency of the moment. At the Civil Rights Division, we have long enforced federal laws that protect people from discrimination based on race, national origin, sex, disability, religion, and military status. For 67 years, our explicit mission has been to give force and meaning to the law, to elevate them beyond mere words on paper, to integrate them into the reality of everyday life for all Americans, regardless of their background, zip code, or circumstance. We've sought to redeem the promise of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Fair Housing Act of 1968, and more. As we reflect on Dr. King's legacy, I want to talk about how the Civil Rights Division has fulfilled this mission in the last 4 years. Under the leadership of President Joe Biden and Attorney General Merrick Garland, we have revitalized and empowered the division. We have expanded the scope of our action to address both overt and covert barriers to civil rights. We have made progress that will be difficult to reverse and changes that are more than symbolic, more than gestures. George Floyd's tragic killing ignited not just a wave of protest, but a renewed national conversation about policing in the criminal justice system. Dr. King had earnestly hoped for such dialogue, but to see the persistence of police misconduct today would have left him heartsick. Dr. King peacefully submitted to arrest, a fact that critics of the Black Lives Matter movement might have invoked as evidence that he was not critical of law enforcement, but King was critical. In his 1963 at the March on Washington, he said, "We can never be satisfied as long as Black Americans are victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality." This is as true today as when he spoke those words, as true for white and brown victims as for Black ones, as true in the North as it is in the South. In case after case, the division has prosecuted police officers and officials in our jails and prisons who thought it was acceptable to brutalize people, disproportionately people of color who didn't show the right level of respect, who did not comply with police orders quickly enough, or who ran away in fear. Through our prosecutions, we have shown that such impunity by law enforcement is not acceptable, that the job of police is to enforce the law and ensure public safety, not to adjudicate guilt and mete out punishment that could lead to loss of life. We've also worked collaboratively with local law enforcement agencies to implement reforms. I've engaged with law enforcement groups across the country and participated in trainings, and we also have conducted pattern or practice investigations, yielding invaluable findings reports that lay bare for the public that police brutality persists. Decades after the sit-ins, the marches, and the letters from jail, we have uncovered and exposed systemic problems and discriminatory policies and practices. Let me be clear, the vast majority of law enforcement in our country works to keep us safe. They make personal sacrifices and put their own lives on the line. But we also know that police officers need more resources, training, and accountability to do their jobs properly. Since 2021, we've negotiated and implemented consent decrees with cities such as Louisville and Minneapolis, where city leaders and police departments all agree on and stand with us in the pursuit of reform. Our decrees address issues such as excessive use of force, biased policing, and the failure to protect people's civil rights. Our work has also yielded powerful success stories in places such as Seattle, Albuquerque, Newark, and Baltimore, where we have worked hard to make real the goals of existing consent decrees, where policing has improved, violent crime has declined, and constitutional policing policies are becoming rooted in the culture of the communities and their police departments. Our decrees require independent monitors and provide accountability both within police departments and with the community, creating long-lasting change that aligns with Dr. King's vision of a just society. And we've been dynamic in our approach to this work, using other tools like the Americans with Disabilities Act to address the full range of complex issues that we face. Dr. King regarded the right to vote as paramount. He understood that the ballot made public officials accountable, that it made them responsive, that it made them listen to the voices of marginalized communities. So long as I do not firmly and irrevocably possess the right to vote, I do not possess myself. I cannot make up my mind. It is made up for me. I cannot live as a democratic citizen observing the laws I have helped to enact. I can only submit to the edict of others, King observed. The Civil Rights Division has carried forward Dr. King's vision for voting rights by vigorously enforcing the Voting Rights Act and fighting voter suppression across the country. In recent years, states have introduced restrictive laws that make it harder for historically disenfranchised communities to access the ballot. We've sued to enjoin unconstitutional voter ID laws, pushed back against racially gerrymandered redistricting maps, worked to ensure language access for minority voters, stood up for military members participating from overseas, advocated for voters with disabilities, and worked to address other tactics that, in the words of one court of appeals, quote, targeted African Americans with almost surgical precision. The division has continued to push for restoration of the full protections of the Voting Rights Act, worked to undo the Supreme Court's 2013 decision in Shelby County, Alabama versus Holder that eviscerated key provisions of the law and opened up the floodgates of voter suppression. We've worked hard to make it clear that the right to vote is not an indulgence or reward bestowed by the state. As we prepare to mark the 70th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, we must all continue to push for something that should be beyond dispute, that we all deserve to have a voice in our democracy. Dr. King's vision for justice also extended to economic equality, which included the right to fair housing, discriminatory housing practices, redlining, and segregation have historically kept people of color from achieving economic mobility and home ownership, the key to generational wealth in America. Dr. King's work with the Poor People's Campaign in the 1960s highlighted the intersections between race and economic injustice. Days following his assassination, Congress responded by adopting the Fair Housing Act of 1968. We use this law and others to ensure fair housing opportunity for all. As part of our nationwide Combating Redlining initiative, we have worked to hold banks and financial institutions accountable for modern-day redlining. We have secured over $152 million in relief for affected communities. Thank you. The number that leverages more than $1 billion in investment. And we have sent a clear message that everyone in our country deserves access to the American dream. And the work that defined the latter days of Dr. King's advocacy right before his assassination was not in vain. Dr. King's dream of a beloved community was one where people of all races, backgrounds, and faiths could live together in peace and mutual respect. But sadly, hate crimes and discrimination continue to tear at the fabric of society. Our work to combat hate crimes at the department and protect vulnerable communities from violence and discrimination is some of the work that I'm most proud of. Since 2021, we have charged more than 150 defendants in more than 135 cases, achieving more than 125 convictions in that time frame. While true justice can't be achieved in the face of an increasing spate of bias-driven mass shootings, we work to provide hope for impacted communities, and we work to protect the legacy of those who've lost their lives. This work is fueled by one simple principle. No one in America should be targeted because of the color of their skin, how they worship, where they are from, or who they love. This commitment aligns with Dr. King's belief in the importance of empathy, compassion, and a common responsibility for one another's well-being. This is just a small segment of our work these last 4 years, but the division has issued, or will soon be issuing, a 4-year report outlining many more accomplishments that I encourage you to read. As with all of our work, I believe deeply in centering the lived experiences of victims of discrimination and survivors of violence. We do our very best work when we are on the ground and in community, gaining a firsthand perspective on the crisis, tragedy, or problem at hand. For the last 4 years, we have traveled across the country, hearing from, standing with, and listening to communities. From the Latino community still grieving in El Paso, Texas, from a xenophobic-fueled mass shooting that resulted in the deaths of 23 Latinos, to Tallulah, Louisiana, one of the poorest regions of the country, to Little Rock, Arkansas, where residents violently resisted the mandate of Brown versus Board of Education. We have traveled across this great nation to ensure that marginalized communities are seen and heard. The tears of grieving mothers who have lost their sons and daughters to police violence, the scars borne by the survivors of the Tree of Life massacre in Pittsburgh, the Tops supermarket shooting in Buffalo, and the Club Q shooting in Colorado Springs have demanded that we do our very best work to tirelessly fight for justice and to do so with empathy and understanding. The angst of communities where justice has been denied for far too long has moved us to be bold and innovative in how we promote healing in communities. In places like in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where survivors and descendants are still reeling from the 1921 race massacre that killed hundreds of Black people and destroyed a thriving Black community. I held the hands of descendants of this tragedy this past Saturday. 103 years following this horrific chapter of American history, the community is still grieving. While no perpetrator is alive to be prosecuted today, we hope that the department's report issued this past Friday, the very first time that the federal government has provided a full account of this atrocity, will help with truth and reconciliation efforts, ensure that the nation never forgets this dark chapter of our history, and supports continued efforts to seek justice in the road ahead. We know that none of our accomplishments would be possible without the partnership of leaders and advocates like so many who have joined us today. I want to thank Mark Morial. I want to thank Ben Crump. I want to thank Catherine Lehman, Rohit Chopra, Derek Johnson, Jill Jefferson, Maya Berry, and Maria Towns for joining us today. Thanks to all of you. For being such important partners and allies in this work to make our nation more just and whole. I thank all of the U.S. attorneys who have served with distinction over these past few years. I thank our sister federal agencies for the work that we collectively do to carry forward Dr. King's vision. I thank my kitchen table of tireless front office deputies who have tolerated the text messages and emails that come at all hours of the night and who have, along with me, burned midnight oil over these last few years and whose good judgment and sound counsel have been so key in ensuring that we have brought our A game or tried to bring our A game to all that we do. And a tremendous debt of gratitude to the career attorneys and professional staff of the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. They are the true backbone of this storied institution. It's been such an honor to lead this extraordinary team, and I stand here in awe of your dedication, your talents, and your commitment to ensuring the rule of law. I know that you will preserve and protect the accomplishments and advancements of the last 4 years, as well as those that came before. You will hold Dr. King's true North Star as your own, using it to guide you toward greater progress and toward true equality in the road ahead. While challenges may lie ahead, we end 2024 in a better place than we started in 2021. As King noted, we must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. So let us today be hopeful, ready to continue the quest for justice in the road ahead. Before I close, though, I want to say thank you to my family. I want to thank my son, Miles. I want to thank my partner and loved ones and friends who traveled from far and near and who are gathered here today. I'm beyond grateful to each and every one of you. I thank you for your patience when I put the work ahead of you, and I thank you for being an endless foundation of inspiration and support. I stand here, the proud daughter of Jamaican immigrants, reared in a public housing complex in Brooklyn, New York, motivated to do this work knowing what it's like to experience poverty and racism and disadvantage. Grateful for the rich opportunities that I was exposed to, and hell-bent on using those opportunities to be of service to those in need and who recognize the basic humanity of every person in this country. How grateful I am to my family and to all of you for making this opportunity to serve possible. Let's leave here today with Dr. King's message in our hearts. King reminds us that every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle. The tireless exertion and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. I consider myself blessed and fortunate to have worked with the dedicated individuals at the Department of Justice and in the civil rights movement. I know that your tireless exertions and passionate concern will carry us forward in the road ahead. Thank you for commemorating with us today.
Let's extend this round of applause for Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clarke. And as her family comes to the stage, we have lots to reflect on. So thank you again to the speakers and the panelists and all of you for joining us on what is an extended program, but a heartfelt program nonetheless. We are having a reception in this very room, and we have a special guest for you. So please stick around, mix and mingle as we now officially close. Thank you.